Our European neighbors have always had a bit of a sense of humor about Americans and our love for our architectural history. It's kind of like kids in kindergarten preparing for college and their point of view. And if you can't measure your buildings in decades, or in centuries versus decades, you're really not very historic at all. The British have a special sense of humor about that too, because of course they're still wondering how this untrained, undisciplined army of frontiersmen beat the largest army and navy in the history of the world. But we did it, and we came to rescue them 2 times after that during world wars. But when Europeans and people from around the world visit our historic sites in America, they're not necessarily looking at the architectural beauty or the expense of construction or the age of the building. They're admiring what happened in them. And I tell you, when you watch people studying Independence Hall, there's that sense of amazement on their face that this little country on the fringe of world civilization created and kept one of the greatest democracies in the history of the world. And they're also certainly impressed with our care and love of all of our historic buildings. But recreating historic places in America, I really would like to say we're still actually in the very early process of this. One of the first preservation attempts in this country was the Mount Vernon Ladies Society that waited till 1860 to start saving that most important man of home in America's history, George Washington. And even Thomas Jefferson's Monticello sat in absolute ruin until almost 100 years after his death, when in 1923, the Thomas Jefferson Foundation was created to preserve this fabulous landmark. In early portions of America's appreciation of architecture, we did tend to look at the biggest and the best built by the robber barons of the late 19th century, George Washington Vanderbilt and his relative Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Breakers, a 70-room cottage, as they like to refer to them, in Newport, Rhode Island. But not long ago, one of my friends on the National Trust whispered in my ear and said, "We've got to stop interpreting America's history through the eyes and the mansions of rich white people. We have to start looking at all of America's history." And actually, while they were thinking of that, people like Joe and Annie Salvatore were doing exactly that by collecting a wonderful sample of buildings to create Cold Spring Village in Cape May County. Little jails, schoolhouses, granges, and nice little vernacular homes that tell us a lot about that history of development. At the same time, many people were making the choice to leave the suburbs or not have the option of living in the suburbs and taking up inner city life, such as this Carroll Street, I love the name, in Brooklyn, New York, one of the many examples. But we've not only looked at places to live, we've looked at our whole collection of architectural history and realized its importance in stabilizing our communities, tourism. The Basilica of Baltimore, one of the great new restorations, it's a must-stop from a religious sense. Chautauqua as a fabulous institute and a real defining gold for our own Cape May Forum, or Chautauqua at the shore. Before government became so frugal in public construction, some of our absolute best landmarks, like the Library of Congress, show the pride and the symbolism of what we could create and our pride in America. Many of the great old conservatories or greenhouses on some of the rich estates have long since disappeared. But thankfully to some well-funded things like Longwood, the DuPont money, we have one of those great examples of these lovely landmarks. I would not want to be operated on in that sunlit dome on the top of the Pennsylvania Hospital on a wooden slab, but learning about the history of medicine in this country is also a very fascinating aspect of the whole historic experience. Some of our landmarks are designed to float. Some of them are designed to guide things that float. They're really just such an amazing array. Museums that are important historically for their design, as the collections that are within them are also considered, as well as landmarks that represent our country's great incredible achievements in structural engineering and design, the Brooklyn Bridge. We also have many famous homes that the homes themselves really reflect the personalities of the people that lived within them, such as the home of Frederick Church, the great Hudson River landscape artist, Olana near Hudson, New York, a state historic site, or the man that put humor in American literature for the first time, Mark Twain in his wonderful home in Hartford, Connecticut. Some of our landmarks even show that even those stuffy Victorians had a sense of humor when it came to design. And Lucy the elephant is an absolute pride of New Jersey. Years ago, when Lucy was suffering from skin cancer, or rust, there was a proposal to give them millions of dollars for repair. One Jersey politician said he thought it should be torn down instead, and he spent the rest of his administration apologizing for that remark. I think the site administrators, though, should have been here for some of our lectures on signage in public spaces, though, to clean up the site a little bit. Our landmarks also tell us a lot about our own history, or the history of where we came from to find that America dream, such as on Ellis Island. They can also remind us of what our country's gone through in our own growth into the West, where 200 defenders at the Alamo held off Santa Anna's army for 13 days, knowing that they were all going to make the ultimate sacrifice as they fought for the freedom of Texas. We don't usually think of going to Center City, New York to appreciate military aviation history, but the Intrepid's done exactly that for us, bringing military history really right into where so many people can take advantage of it. And on the other side of the coin, before we start thinking that military and wars are so great, we can get those vivid reminders of the costs that people pay when you visit something like the American Cemetery in Normandy, France. One of my favorites, though, is trying to keep landmarks in use. So you not only experience them in a museum, but you can actually ride one of those great old streetcars, the Girard Avenue streetcar in downtown Philadelphia. And I know public transportation could be vastly improved from this, but it's a landmark in working action. The restoration and preservation of hotels has probably been one of the absolute biggest challenges in America's protection of our architectural history. And one of my favorite examples of that is Mohawk Mountain House in New Paltz, New York, which has really set the tone. But I have to admit, right here in Cape May, we no longer have 56 hotels lining our beachfront as we did in 1850, but we have led the way by saving Congress Hall, Chalfont, Carroll Villa, the Inn of Cape May. We've done a far better job than many other historic communities that once had hotels that dominated their countryside. The gentleman that has this Staples store in Soho, New Jersey, will openly admit that that fabulous facade does wonders to his business, and realizes that being there in a great building like this is certainly not only enhancing the neighborhood, but great for business as well. We have buildings that have been protecting their original uses, like Head House Square in downtown Philadelphia, and the market area, or the shambles that run out behind it. It's still one of the best little marketplaces in Philadelphia, but to support the building, it's also good for weddings, sales, cocktail parties, and just a great landmark. And this work that's gone on in inner city has really even led to very strong organizations that are working collectively to protect their communities. The Society Hill Civic Association in Philadelphia is one of my favorites. They even have work weekends. They work together with the police to make their streets safer. They work together with Public Works to see that things that happen within their neighborhood are done to be historically compatible. Tourism is certainly generated by historic preservation. And one of the challenges with that is that sometimes we can get too many people in too small of a historic site, such as Disney World bringing itself to Little Key West, Florida. I always remember one of my favorite cartoons of two gentlemen sitting up on the promenade talking about, one gentleman said, "If it's tourist season, why can't we shoot them?" and I can tell you there's people in Cape May that would probably get a hunting permit if it was available. But rather than shunning an industry that can be so beneficial to a community, why don't we work with the tourists but eliminate some of the things that they bring along with them, like their automobiles? And here's where New York took the challenging step to get the automobiles out of Times Square and let the people take it over. And I think it was one of the most noble and impressive events ever, and it still has made that so much more of a livable city. Another way to do that is not have all the tourists come at the same period of time, but work on ways to extend the season, such as Dr. Joe Salvatore has done with the Naval Air Station Wildwood. World War II bombers coming in for visitations, and for a few extra major bucks, you can go up with them and feel the experience of what the American flyers went through during World War II. Philadelphia Seafront has worked very hard to use its history to add Penn's Landing, to combine it with the Independence Mall area and attract people over to the waterfront. The thing that they need to really undo, and are working on it, is the fact that 95 got cut right between these two very important districts. And that is actively happening. I think someday 95 will be bridged over so these two great areas of town can flow together. A lot of that is being promoted by the wonderful Seaport Museum right in downtown, right down on the waterfront, that does things like antique boat shows, and really creative. Since most museums don't really make money, they've taken on the project of doing boat restorations and teaching this trade to inner city kids who can come and learn this experience, gain this appreciation, and it actually becomes a profit center for the museum. Cape May has found many, many ways to extend its off-season. When you think of how busy our town is today, film festivals, TEDx, the numerous things going on. This did not exist many years ago. When my wife and I opened our bed and breakfast in 1971, it was Memorial Day to Labor Day, and that was it for the year. But we know that everybody gets turned on by Victorian clothing or design or furniture. So something like a car show can really get that testosterone up in a male thinking about driving that Shelby Cobra down an open highway. And we've also worked on many ways to try to look at all these different seasons of the year and find ways to have attractions, such as taking these streets that are now fairly empty with automobiles and using those for events like parades and parties or block parties. And here we are on the Halloween parade, which you all missed because you were in here doing TEDx today. Our cities are doing the same thing too. Downtown Philadelphia is more than willing to close the streets from the automobiles and do things like the Union Army on the 105th anniversary of the start of the Civil War, marching south to take on those rebels, expecting that they would return in probably a couple of weeks once they had accomplished that major feat. Even that rather stuffy world of the art museums has found that sculptures such as this plane crash right outside the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts is a great way to suddenly attract attention and start teaching that design and art and a little bit of humor mixed in is a wonderful way to do that. Generally, in the past, when we've thought about art, statues, monuments, we've thought basically of things like Andrew Jackson surrounded by cannons around him as the only appropriate salute. But in the grounds for sculpture outside of Trenton, New Jersey, they've taken a whole new and slightly humorous look at art and sculpture, but even have created really nice settings that you can be right in there with the sculpture, sit with the sculpture, admire clothing and lifestyles, and really get a part of the feel for the work of the artist. It's a new must-stop in the state of New Jersey. Historic house museums like our Emlen Physick Estate always have this problem of funding because you can only charge so much of admission to go through a house, and houses like this are extremely expensive to maintain. But since we have the grounds around it, we've taken those grounds and made them available for many, many types of functions on the grounds, such as the Volvo Cars regional reunion, the cafe or tea room that we have in the back. We have fairs. This summer we launched into a craft beer and crab festival, which was so successful, I can assure you that it's going to happen again. We've also worked on recycling of buildings. Not every building has to be kept in its original use. And this church building from the 1850s on Lafayette Street was recently converted into a fabulous new home for Cape May Stage, now going into its 25th year, with beautiful setting, with restoration of the buildings, the grounds, and adaptive reuse of its interior to have artist areas, stage, and sloping seating to make it work extremely well for a 135-seat theater for the community. Other communities have worked to save historic buildings by relocating them. This is Ship Carpenters Square right outside of downtown Lewis, where buildings like a lifeboat, an old life-saving service lifeboat station, became one of about 20 historic buildings that were saved from throughout the state of Delaware and moved to this little village. It might look like suburbia from a street plan, but everybody in it is living in a saved historic building, and it's a wonderful area to walk through. Other buildings need to be moved just so the public can have access to them, and this Octic and Screw Pile Lighthouse from the Chesapeake Bay fortunately moved to St. Michael's Maritime Museum, and is a wonderful way to be able to explore and learn a lot about the life of a lighthouse keeper. Sometimes the buildings can't be saved, but their facade can be. And right behind Independence Hall in Philadelphia, this fabulous old Egyptian revival facade has been worked into a very modern building in the background. And from the streetscape, you still get this feeling of history, even though the need for the use of that land dominated and the buildings went much higher behind it. When Independence Hall needed a restoration job, the local people chipped in to make sure that we didn't lose the beauty of the building while it was surrounded with scaffolding, and came up with wonderful artwork to recreate the building behind it on the canvases that were covering the scaffolding. People in cities need parks. They don't have front yards, porches, backyards, that personal space that so many of us in a community like Cape May does. And the restoration of those parks is very important to keeping that community life in the city. This is Franklin Square, one of the last squares to really get attention in downtown Philadelphia. And they really did it right, even making their miniature golf course a little lesson in history by duplicating some of the great landmarks of the community in the golf course. So, presenting history to the public. Most historic communities are doing their best to try to keep technology out of this particular aspect of it. And if you really want to learn about what a colonial era woman went through in travel, what better way to learn it from a woman in a carriage, dressed appropriately, on her buggy with horse, giving a wonderful talk about what travel was like and the difficulties that they would need to face. Also in Williamsburg, you can learn from Bill Barker, who imitates very successfully Thomas Jefferson, a lot about gardening and agriculture during the 19th century. And of course, right here in Cape May County at Cold Spring Village, Jim Stevens will help interpret the whole colonial experience as he tours you through this wonderful little village creation. One of the nice things about historic areas in America is we certainly don't have the travel challenges such as Machu Picchu in bringing people to them. But one of the best things that we've also learned to do is communicating with each other. The preservation world has come together, so when one area has a good idea or a technique or thoughts on new ways to control design standards within the communities, we definitely go ahead and share it with the others. Does Cape May do everything right? No, but I tell you, those of us that live here are extremely proud of what we've been able to create and protect in this community. And I can assure you, there's not a builder or a government official in this community that doesn't secretly say, don't touch the preservationists. They'll come up fighting. Thank you very much.